Hi, thanks to the person who submitted this question. The question is, I'll read out the whole thing. It's a bit longer, but so it goes, big one, and maybe not even possible to really answer. And I'm really interested. Gender is obviously very important to you. Do you know where that comes from? Is it deep inside? Is it a way of masking that is existentially important to you? Or does it come from somewhere else altogether? Since gender feels so unimportant for me, I'm really curious and would love to understand. Your experience seems to be very different from mine in that respect.
Hi, I'm Millie. I'm an autistic person and also many other things, but autism affects everything in my life in both beautiful and challenging ways. This is a series where I answer anonymous questions about my life, with the intention of showing what life is really like for one autistic person. Hopefully, this will help you understand other autistic people that you are close to, even though we are all different, and maybe you will see some of me in yourself, and that will help you learn something about your own life. If you want to ask me a question, the link to the anonymous form is in the description below with more information. Thanks for watching.
Before we start, if you want to see the mind map I use for this video, it's the notes I'm looking at. Then I always put them on my website, the blog for these videos, as well as I'll be putting a transcript up there as well. So if you'd like to read the transcript, that will be matching the closed captions. I'll have that as there as well, and there'll be a link to that in the video description. So gender, yeah, a bit of gender history about me. So I was assigned male at birth, and then I came out as trans as an adult in my 30s, and yeah, so I was actually using she, her pronouns at first. So I was trans woman, and then eventually that just wasn't quite true to myself, and yeah, and then I settled on non-binary, which is what I currently identify as. I use they them pronouns, but also like the term agender. I haven't really been using that, but I like non-binary. I think of it. this is like this seems very autistic, at least in the way my brain works, but non-binary always kind of appealed to me because of the relation to math and programming. So binary being literally zeros and ones, so the opposite ends of the spectrum, just one or the other. So I like to think of that. So non-binary, meaning not just a 0 or 1, or not just one or the other, being in between, or like a spectrum of genders somewhere in the middle, that kind of thing. That's what it means to me and how I like to explain it to people. Yeah, but I also like the term agender. I haven't been using that much, but I think it's just a nicer word to write out. But yeah, that my understanding of that is it means more kind of without gender. So I think that's how I feel a lot of the time. Like that becomes almost the ideal, right? Like to not have to think about it that much. The reason gender is important to me, well, it kind of goes in a loop, I guess. I feel like gender is important to me because of being trans, but being trans is also because gender is important to me, I guess. But yeah, it's just something I've always thought about since I'm little, like this feeling of just being different, and that mismatch between how I looked in that expression, like how I was labeled earlier, and how I felt inside, and then that causes dysphoria. So you can call that gender dysphoria. And that gender dysphoria, causes a lot of distress. So yeah, that feeling of gender for me does feel like it comes from deep inside, from a core place. Yeah, it feels like a fundamental part of me. Like, the only way I can explain is I can't imagine what it feels like not to think about gender. And yeah, that thinking about gender all the time is kind of a defining thing of being trans, I think, or at least of the part before, for me, before transitioning, like kind of my goal, because it caused so much distress, like that mismatch from how I felt outside to kind of how people perceived me on the outside, um, caused me to think a lot about how I looked and my body and how I sounded and everything. So, so the ideal goal eventually was not to have to think about it all the time and not have so much distress. And I think I've gotten to that point now for the most part, which is amazing. I mostly just, you know, deal with the issues of being neurodivergent. Um, and yeah, I'd like to make a whole video about my transitioning journey at some point as well, because that's a whole separate topic. So yeah, is the other part of the question is gender and is a form of masking. I don't know if this I'm interpreting the question correctly exactly, but I don't know. I thought that sounded really. I thought that was really interesting. So, you know, when you're little, gender is just not that important. Like socially or to you, everybody's a little bit more the same. And then it gets really rough if you have this mismatch feeling by the time you hit puberty and your body's changing and everything. That's when it gets a lot more distressing and traumatic. So as an adolescent, I had this certain amount of femininity and underlying femininity, and it did cause this certain amount of social rejection and yeah, just added to that feeling of being ostracized. And it did turn out to be like I am queer, but because of how I was labeled, and I've thought I was, because I didn't realize I was trans. I thought I was straight at the time, but I guess other people perceived this better than I did, and yeah, so was labeled as queer sometimes. It's caused some relationship issues. It was like I was seen as hiding that I was gay or queer, or like that I was not masculine enough. And as a young adult, I look back and I think I was kind of overcompensating masculine traits. Like, I went through a period when I was younger of kind of just dressing more how I wanted, and then eventually later I was trying to I grew like a long beard and had really short hair and stuff, but I really kind of hated myself at that time too. So I think it goes hand in hand. Looking back, just didn't realize it at the time. And yeah, like that part felt like masking, like I was masking the more femme side of me. That was the part that I really liked. So I think early on when I was transitioning, so yeah, I was using she, her pronouns. Like, it felt like then I just swung in the other direction. And I think it is because of this social, cultural label, that we're meant to fit in, which is, now it's like, doesn't make any sense. But yeah, even if I wasn't super conscious of it, I think even that was just like okay, I'm not one side of the binary, so I'm the other side of the binary. So just trying to fit into that as much as possible. And yeah, and then some of that didn't feel right. Like, it didn't feel quite right. It felt a lot closer, like much, much closer. And, you know, but I was leaning so into the like stereotypically feminine things. I just really pushed into that side, and yeah, so that was closer to I felt like who I am, but that still seemed like masking a little bit. And yeah, and then coming out as non-binary, like it's this constant progression of figuring yourself out, and yeah, and that's felt really like freedom. So not having to meet either of these binary labels, and that feels like very it does feel like unmasking in terms of gender. Like I'm going through a slow process of unmasking in terms of autism, like consciously or not, but um, yeah, that was unmasking in terms of gender. Like I'm not trying to fit any of these things, so I'm just being more of myself now, I feel like. So I mentioned before that part of being trans early on was yeah, feeling alien, not fitting in, and that just really relates to being autistic as well. Like that's such a common experience of autism, and so it's hard to separate what parts are, that feels like it's because of autism. But um, to me, what's happened is that like I see the whole gender thing and being gender non-conforming all through the lens of being autistic now. Like it seems, not that all trans people or gender non-conforming people are autistic, because that's not true at all. But that to me explains why I'm trans. Like it fits under that. Like there's a huge amount of gender diversity in autistic people, and yeah, autistic people are more likely to be gender diverse, and gender diverse people are more likely to be autistic. Um, I'll link to an article that sums up some of the research on that subject. So part of me being autistic is just having difficulty really conforming with all kinds of social norms. And yeah, so there's a good and bad side of that. The good is freedom to be creative and expressive and combine things in ways that are fun and comfortable for me. And the difficult side of it is standing out and being different, and how that can lead to social isolation. So since my autism diagnosis, I actually don't identify like really as a label as trans anymore. But I am transgender, and then I use non-binary as a label and agender, but but that's really because this whole autism non-conforming in general aspect really kind of explained that. So I felt like I didn't need both as an explanation, if that makes sense. So yeah, ultimately I'm just autistic, and to me that explains the gender thing, and it's like means I just exist outside of this gender binary, and I am myself, and that is just who I am, and that explains me. So thanks so much to the person who asked this question. It was a really interesting question, and complex topic, and could be a whole series of videos, and remind me that I want to do this video on my my experience going through transitioning, because I feel that would be interesting. That might help somebody who would be able to relate with what I went through. If you want to ask me a question, the link to the form will be in the video description, and I'll probably put it in a comment as well, but it'll definitely be in the video description. If you like what I do and you're able to support me financially, making videos like this does cost me money, and I just have a disability income, so I'll put a link to below where You can send me a small donation if you want, and can. And yeah, any amount helps. I really appreciate that. Thank you for taking the time to watch and learn about my experience being autistic and my experience of gender. Thank you.